Good evening. Welcome again to the Monastery of All Saints of North America, New Ostrog. I've been asked a question this evening and I'm going to respond a bit. And it brings me to a certain subject that sometimes is a bit touchy in our day. And that is what happens when we have dogmatized. Remember, the Holy Fathers never used the word dogma the way we do. We didn't have any dogmas in the Orthodox Church in anything like the modern sense. And we still actually don't. But when we ourselves have dogmatized certain concepts or ideas from past centuries, and I realize how many times by doing that and seeing things in absolute black and white and in concrete simplistic terms, we often destroy people's lives, and sometimes even cause their deaths through suicide or just surrendering or giving up on life. And I want to just touch on one subject that might illustrate to us how that can go wrong. The other thing is that when we dogmatize knowledge or understandings, from say 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago or even 100 years ago, we put those things forth as absolutes, and then we make it impossible for people to be Christians because we're so wrong, and they know that we're so wrong. Not just the political involvement of churches. You know, the Los Angeles Times had an article the other day. They had done quite a study, and a national poll had been done of younger people. And you notice, by the way, that the so-called Crystal Cathedral in California, Dr. Schuler, had just filed for bankruptcy. They don't have anybody going there giving money anymore. And the evangelical churches have suffered enormous losses of young people. And the young people being polled, very often they have reasonably traditional Christian views, but absolutely refuse to go to any church. And the most common reason given is because of the political involvement of the evangelical and fundamentalist churches. They've rejected them because the political involvement has nothing whatsoever to do with the gospel, and nothing whatsoever to do with what Christ taught and revealed to us. And they don't agree with the political involvement of their church. So you see, when there's a political involvement, it's always partisan. Some of the members of the church don't agree with the same political party you do. Consequently, you push them out of the church. And others simply don't want to be involved in politics or talk politics. They want to talk about Christ and about the Holy Scripture and the Gospel. When you don't do that, there's nothing there for them anymore, so they leave. But I want to talk about something a little more deep and profound, I think, because the question that was asked me is, at what point does a fetus have a soul? At what point does an embryo become ensouled, as some people say? And there were debates on this millennia ago, centuries ago, decades ago, probably even yesterday. And in general, in the early church, it was thought that when the sperm attached itself, I think was the phrase used, because people thought that the male sperm entered the woman's tube and attached itself to the inside of it. They didn't really know about embryos, the formation of embryos, and about ova and things like that. And this is why, even to this day, some women will say, well, I'm having George's baby. Because, and particularly in Islam today, but among a lot of Christians, the idea that the woman was simply an incubator for the man's sperm. A single sperm would be ejected and would attach itself inside the tube, and a baby would develop from it. That was, so they would say that the moment it becomes attached, it has a soul. Well, there are quite a number of things wrong with that. And there are a number of things wrong with the way we think about and see reproduction and what takes place in the reproductive process. If we say, of course, sex has nothing to do with anything except cranking out babies or being a reproductive factory. But let's take a look at, okay, when does an embryo have a soul? Some people will say the moment the sperm enters the egg and it becomes fertilized, there's a soul. Let's stop and think about the fact that 70% of those embryos are going to be lost even after they've been fertilized. 70% at a minimum are going to be lost after they're fertilized. Another situation is that somewhere between 70 and 90% of embryos are going to be lost in another way. They come out in menstruation. There's a spontaneous abortion of 15 to 25% of fetuses before they develop enough. And sometimes the woman doesn't even know she's pregnant before the spontaneous abortion takes place. So about 15 to 25% pregnancies are terminated that way. That's quite a sizable number, particularly when you think of the millions of pregnancies every year, or billions. There's another situation too. When an embryo is taken, it starts to develop, and then it doesn't continue to develop. And it turns into a hydatidiform mole or a corrine carcinoma, but it has exactly the same DNA as when it was still a developing embryo. Only now it's a corrine carcinoma or a hydatidiform mole inside. Does that mean that if the doctor removes the carcinoma or the mole, that he kills a baby who has a soul? And if the soul is there immediately upon the conception, then of the 70% of those conceived embryos that are lost, of course the souls must go straightway to heaven, because there could be no sin, and of course we don't accept the idea of original sin. So somebody asked me once when I was discussing this with somebody one time, and he said, well, what happens in the resurrection then? Are those souls placed back into an embryo? And the embryo's in heaven together with the soul, or what? So you see what kind of situations or traps we can get placed in or caught in when we start dogmatizing things and thinking we know a great deal more than we do know. What kind of untruth we tell, and how we end up persecuting and destroying people on the basis of sheer mythologies that are based on models of reality that long ago were proved false. And this is just a part of it. You know, the infant has the same DNA as the placenta, but not necessarily the same DNA as the mother. And that mole that can form, or the carcinoma that can form from an embryo that doesn't continue to develop properly, has the same DNA as the viable, fertilized embryo. And if 70% of these embryos are lost before they actually become concrete, and 15 to 25% undergo spontaneous abortion, often without the mother's slightest knowledge that she's aborted it, simply hasn't been there long enough for her to know if the pregnancy exists, then perhaps we should rethink some of the mythological dogmatisms of absolutes that we have formed about the reproductive system and how reproduction takes place and all that, and rethink a lot of the ideas we have connected with it, including, I dare say, conception control. So we'll go on from there later.